The first scream wasn't the dog's. It was the little girl's, high and breaking as she staggered backward in the middle of the terminal with 2 paper bags clutched to her chest, and a huge German shepherd lunging toward her. Teeth bared, leash burning through the officer's hand as a circle of travelers shouted things like, "Get that animal away from her," and raised their phones to record what looked like a brutal scene that would later live online under a headline like, "K9 barks desperately at a crying little girl." But when police realized the truth, it was too late. Grab your coffee and stay with me, because what happened next shook that entire terminal to its core. 30 minutes earlier, Officer Ronald Bryant walked his K9 partner along the polished floor of Chicago O'Hare's International Terminal, doing what they did almost every day, moving past families and business travelers and exhausted backpackers while announcements rolled overhead and suitcase wheels scraped along the floor. Ronald held the leash in his left hand and rested his right on his belt, not because he expected trouble, but because that's what years of habit had taught him to do. Zeus trotted at his side, big shoulders swaying, ears relaxed, tongue hanging just enough to show he wasn't tense. A little boy in a dinosaur hoodie tugged on his mother's sleeve and pointed. "Mom, look at the police dog," he whispered, eyes shining. Ronald gave the kid a small nod, and Zeus flicked his gaze over for a second but stayed on task. "Hi, my amazing friends and family. Welcome back to Vigilant Heart Tales. Before we jump deep into today's story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing all your names and countries. And don't forget to check out the other stories on the channel. Tomorrow I've got another crazy one coming that I know you'll enjoy. Alright, let's get into it. The dog knew when he was working. Ronald trusted him more than he trusted most people in uniform. Zeus didn't lie, didn't panic, didn't care about cameras. He only cared about what his nose told him. They passed a coffee stand where the line curled around stanchions, frustrated travelers glancing at their watches. A woman in a navy suit caught sight of Zeus and straightened up automatically, as if some part of her brain still believed that misbehavior got you sent to the principal's office. Ronald let his eyes do the quiet scan he'd repeated 1,000 times. Unattended bags, anyone too interested in security, anyone sweating in a winter jacket. Nothing stood out. It was just another busy morning. At that same time, at the other end of the hall, a small girl named Suzanne stood near a row of self-serve kiosks, holding 2 brown paper shopping bags that almost reached her knees. She wore a navy pea coat, blue jeans that showed a bit of ankle, and black flats. Her blonde hair was pulled back by a thin headband. She looked like she should be holding a stuffed animal, not standing by herself watching strangers hurry past. Next to her a man in a gray hoodie knelt down. "You remember what I told you, Susie?" he asked, voice light, like this was all a game. She nodded, gripping the bags tighter. "Don't let go," she repeated. "Right," he said, smiling. "These are special presents for your mom. Super secret. When she sees you get on that plane with them, she's going to be so happy she'll probably cry. So we keep them safe, okay?" Suzanne nodded again, though something uneasy moved behind her eyes. "Can't I come with you to get the tickets?" she asked. "You gotta wait right here," the man said. "If you move, we could miss our boarding call. I'll be right back, promise. You're my brave girl." He squeezed her shoulder, then stood quickly and took a step back. He smelled like breath mints and something sharper underneath, but Suzanne didn't have words for that. She just knew she didn't like it. "What about Daddy?" she asked, voice small. "Daddy's working, remember?" the man said without turning around. "He'll meet you later. Now hold on to those bags and don't talk to strangers." Then he walked away, merging with a flow of people until she couldn't see the gray hoodie anymore. Suzanne watched the space where he'd vanished, blinking fast. The bags felt heavier each minute. Inside them, under layers of tissue paper, thick cream-colored candles knocked gently together, their hidden inner chambers already starting to leak something no one there could see. Back down the hall, Ronald checked his watch and rubbed his shoulder as Zeus led him toward the food court for another pass. They'd been on their feet for hours, but the dog still moved with the same steady rhythm. "Almost break time, partner," Ronald murmured. "I might even let you steal a fry." Zeus kept going, head level, eyes shifting calmly. Ronald had learned the dog's moods so well he could read them in the way Zeus placed each paw. Relaxed meant routine. Stiff meant suspicion. And then, in the space of one breath, relaxed vanished. Zeus's head snapped to the left, nose lifting slightly. His whole body went still, muscles tight, like he'd walked into an invisible wall. Ronald felt the leash tense. "What is it, boy?" he asked, his tone changing without him deciding to change it. Zeus inhaled again, deeper, like he was pulling a scent out of the crowded air and breaking it apart. The fur along his spine rose in a narrow line. His ears locked forward. Ronald had seen Zeus worn on gunpowder, on plastic explosives, on residue from training aids, but this was different. There was anxiety in the way the dog's chest moved, fast and shallow. "Heel," Ronald ordered quietly, expecting Zeus to fall back into position like always. Zeus didn't move. The leash shook in Ronald's hand. Then the dog let out a harsh, explosive bark, the kind that made nearby people jump and turn. Before Ronald could tighten his grip, Zeus lunged. The dog launched forward with such force that Ronald's shoulder jerked painfully and his boot slid a few inches across the smooth floor. A woman carrying a tray of coffees gasped and stepped aside as 90 pounds of German shepherds surged past. "Hey!" someone shouted. "Watch it." Ronald dug in and used both hands on the leash. "Zeus, no," he snapped, but the dog strained against him, chest pumping, eyes fixed on something ahead. Ronald followed his line of sight, heart hammering now. At the far end of the open hall, near the kiosks, he saw her. A little girl, alone, holding 2 brown paper bags. Suzanne's face was already red from crying. Tear tracks shone on her cheeks. She hugged the bags like they were the only solid thing in the world. She looked around constantly, searching for a face that wasn't there. In that instant, to Ronald, she was just a lost kid who needed help. To Zeus, she was surrounded by something far worse. The dog lunged again, and Ronald had no choice but to move with him or be dragged. "Ma'am, sir, move aside," Ronald called as they wove through the crowd. People stepped back, some grabbing children, some glaring. Phones rose, hands shaking slightly as people started filming. By the time Ronald and Zeus reached the open space around Suzanne, a loose ring of onlookers had formed, sensing drama the way sharks sense blood. Suzanne looked up at the sound of paws slamming the floor toward her. Her eyes went huge. Her lip trembled. She took a stumbling step back, bags knocking against her knees. Zeus let out another set of savage barks, louder, closer, so powerful Ronald could feel them in his ribs. The dog snapped his jaws in the air, not at her but at the bags, at the space around them, frantic and insistent. "Get that dog away from her," a woman screamed from behind Ronald. "He's going to bite her," someone else yelled. "I'm recording this," a man announced, like that was a heroic act. Ronald's instincts battled inside him. One said, "This looks terrible, pull the dog back, defuse the situation before you end up on the news." The other said, "You have never seen Zeus behave like this without a reason." The second voice won. "Everyone back up." Ronald shouted, planting his feet. "Airport police, back up now." Some people listened and shuffled back a few feet. Others held their ground, pointing, shouting. Suzanne sobbed, the sound catching in her throat. "Make him stop," she cried. "Make him stop." Ronald locked eyes with her for the first time. She couldn't have been more than 6. Her hands were tiny on the bag handles, the paper crumpling under her grip. "Hey, hey," he said, forcing his voice to soften while his arms shook from holding Zeus. "I'm not going to let him hurt you, okay? But I need you to do something for me. I need you to put those bags down." She shook her head desperately. "No," she shouted. "Uncle Marty said don't let go. They're presents for Mommy." The name barely registered. Ronald was watching something else now. Suzanne's chest was heaving too fast. Between sobs she gave a sharp cough, then another, wetter this time. A thin red line appeared under one nostril and slid down toward her lip. Ronald's stomach dropped. Fear alone didn't do that. Behind him the airport manager, a compact man in a suit with an ID lanyard bouncing against his tie, rushed into the circle. "Officer, you need to restrain your animal right now," he barked, voice bristling with anger and panic. "There are kids watching. He's not out of control," Ronald shot back, not taking his eyes off Zeus. "He's alerting." Alerting was the word they used in training when a dog signaled that it had detected something dangerous. Usually Zeus did it in a clean, practiced way. Sit, stare, one sharp bark. This was messier louder, full of urgency. "I don't care what he's doing, you're scaring her," the manager said, gesturing at Suzanne, who now coughed again and swayed on her feet. For a heartbeat, everything slowed in Ronald's mind. He saw the girl's blue coat, the white knuckles on the bag handles, the smear of blood at her nose, the way Zeus kept throwing his body toward those bags as if trying to drive them away from her. He heard none of this 30 minutes ago. Whatever it was had started in the time since they'd walked this hall last. "Sweetheart," he said, louder now, cutting through the shouting around them. "Listen to me. My dog smells something bad in those bags. I need you to drop them." Suzanne tried to answer, but instead another cough tore through her. Her face had gone from flushed to strangely pale around the mouth, a gray hint spreading under her skin. Her knees trembled. At that moment Ronald understood something simple and terrible. If he did nothing, this child might die in front of him. Zeus pulled again, choke chain rattling. The dog's whole body screamed one message: get them away from her. Ronald made his choice. He loosened his grip just enough. Zeus surged forward with a deep guttural roar and lunged at the nearest bag. Gasps exploded around them. People shouted, cursing, calling for security, for someone to stop this. Zeus's teeth closed not on skin, but on one of the paper handles. He yanked sideways with all his strength. The bag tore. The bottom sagged outward and something heavy thudded inside, wrapped in paper, before the torn bag dropped toward the floor. Suzanne shrieked, reaching for it. "No. That's Mommy's," she cried. Her other hand clamped so hard on the remaining bag that her knuckles went almost white. Ronald didn't wait for a second round. He lunged forward himself, using Zeus's movement for cover, and grabbed the girl's wrist. Her skin felt oddly cool and clammy. "I'm sorry," he said through his teeth as she tried to twist away. "I know you don't understand, but I need this." He pried her fingers off the second bag, ignoring the way she screamed at him, and ripped it free. In one motion he spun and hurled both bags across the polished floor as far as he could, sending them skidding toward a support column where no one was standing. They slid, tipped, and came to rest, slightly crumpled, about 20 feet away. In the same second, Suzanne's body seemed to deflate. Her eyes rolled back, her cries cut off mid-syllable, and her legs gave out. She collapsed backward on the floor, her head striking the hard surface with a sound that made every hair on Ronald's neck rise. "Jesus," someone whispered. Ronald dropped to his knees beside her. "Suzanne." "Stay with me," he shouted, pressing 2 fingers to the side of her neck. Her pulse fluttered wildly, then stuttered. Her lips, which had been pink with crying, were edging toward a bluish color. Her chest hitched unevenly, as if every breath had to fight its way in. "Medic!" Ronald yelled, voice raw. "We need medical right now." For a moment the crowd, which had been full of accusations and outrage, grew weirdly quiet. Even through the silence he could hear the distant thump of running feet. Zeus, who moments before had looked like a wild animal to everyone else, suddenly went still. He moved close and lowered his head, nudging Suzanne's limp hand with his nose, whining softly in a tone that held none of the savage force from earlier. The airport manager stared at the bags, then at the girl on the ground, his face drained of color. "What did you do to her?" he asked, but the bravado was gone. "I took poison out of her hands," Ronald shot back without looking up. "Or something damn close." Paramedics burst through the ring of people with a stretcher and gear bags, dropping to the floor on the other side of Suzanne. One of them pushed Ronald gently but firmly back. "We've got her, officer," she said. "What happened?" "She was holding 2 bags," Ronald said quickly. "My dog alerted, strong. She started coughing, nosebleed, then collapsed after I took the bags away. Whatever's in there, you don't want to stand too close." The paramedic glanced at Zeus and then at the bags in the distance and didn't argue. "Hazmat now," she snapped to her partner. As they fitted an oxygen mask over Suzanne's face and checked her pupils, a security supervisor spoke urgently into his radio, calling for the bomb squad and ordering the surrounding area cleared. People who'd been hungry for drama a few minutes before now backed away fast, suddenly aware of how near they'd been to something that might be a lot worse than a PR incident. As the paramedics lifted Suzanne onto the stretcher and wheeled her away, her hand slipped from Zeus's nose. The dog watched her go, ears pricked, body tense, as if ready to follow. Ronald tightened his grip on the leash again. His arms ached, his heart pounded, and yet the real weight pressing down on him was the knowledge that the story other people had just watched was very different from the one he'd lived. To them it was simple. K9 attacks little girl. Officer rips away her presents. Child collapses. The phones capturing it would not show the smell only Zeus could sense, or the way her skin had changed color while the crowd shouted at him to stop. As 2 men in heavy vests jogged toward the abandoned bags with equipment cases in hand, the airport manager stepped closer to Ronald, jaw tight. "If those bags turn out to be nothing," he said quietly, "you and that dog are finished here." Ronald stared straight at the paper bag sitting alone on the empty floor, picturing the candles inside, the way Suzanne had coughed and swayed, the wild desperation in Zeus's barking. "Then they better not be nothing," he said. The bomb techs reached the bags and dropped to one knee, working fast but careful, setting instruments around them. Ronald couldn't hear the readings from where he stood, but he saw the way one tech froze, looked at his partner, and then jerked his head sharply toward the perimeter. One gloved hand rose, signaling for everyone nearby to move back farther, now. In that small charged pause, Ronald knew 2 things with absolute clarity. Zeus had been right, and whatever truth they were about to discover in those bags had already started its work inside a 6-year-old girl before anyone but a dog realized she was dying. In that small charged pause, Ronald knew two things with absolute clarity. Zeus had been right, and whatever truth they were about to discover in those bags had already started its work inside a 6-year-old girl before anyone but a dog realized she was dying. And as the bomb techs shouted for more space and waved everyone farther back, two more officers moved in on Ronald from behind, gripping his elbows as if they were ready to drag him out of his own scene, yet he twisted free and stepped closer to the tape until he was right at the edge, knuckles white on Zeus's leash while the dog stood pressed against his leg, muscles tight, watching the men around the bags. One tech held a small handheld sensor over the torn opening of the first bag, stared at the readout, then swore under his breath and yelled toward the command post for hazmat suits and immediate isolation. And whatever he said into his radio made the supervisor's face harden and drain of color. Then the supervisor turned toward Ronald with a look that said he didn't want to admit what was suddenly obvious but couldn't avoid it anymore. "You and the dog quarantine room now," he snapped, not as a punishment but as a safety order. And Ronald gave Zeus a quick pat on the neck and followed the escort down a hallway, hearing behind him the rising noise of people being pushed away, gates being shut, voices raised in confusion and anger while announcements tried to keep things calm. They shoved Ronald and Zeus into a small conference room that had been turned into an improvised containment space, handed him a mask, and shut the door, leaving him staring at the blank walls while Zeus turned in a tight circle before lying down at his boots, still breathing hard. Ronald's shoulder throbbed from where the dog had dragged him. His hand shook a little, but his mind stayed locked on one image, Suzanne's small body going limp, her lips changing color. The way it had all happened the second he tore those bags out of her hands, and even though the room was quiet, his head was full of the echo of strangers yelling that he'd gone too far. A few minutes later the airport police chief, Harris, burst in, tablet under one arm, mask hanging from his neck, eyes furious yet unsettled because he'd just come from the bomb squad feed and had seen something that threw his accusations off balance. "All right, Bryant, talk me through it again from the start," he demanded, dropping into a chair opposite and slapping the tablet on the table. Ronald told him everything, from Zeus freezing in the middle of the hall to the moment Suzanne collapsed. And he kept his voice even while inside he replayed every second and tried to see if there had been any other choice than the one he made. And when he finished, Harris rubbed his face and said, "Bomb squad says those so-called presents are not presents, they're shells, double-layered. Inner chamber full of some kind of liquid nerve stuff. One of the casings cracked. Their scanner readings are off the charts. Whatever that kid was holding, it was leaking directly into her face and hands." And hearing that made Ronald's stomach twist because it confirmed his worst suspicion and also made him want to grab every person who had shouted at him and shove that tablet under their noses. Yet he just nodded and looked down at Zeus, who lay with his head on his paws but kept his eyes on the door like he expected more trouble. Harris went on saying, "They found small circuits built into the bottom of each candle, remote detonation capability. They think the stuff was meant to be triggered once it was on a plane, maybe during climb when nobody could escape. If those bags had gotten onto an aircraft, we'd be dealing with more than one kid in trouble." And Ronald exhaled slowly, feeling both relief and anger. Because relief told him he hadn't overreacted and anger reminded him that a 6-year-old had been used as a prop in someone's experiment. "Where is she?" Ronald asked, and Harris replied, "Medical wing, isolation bay. They're treating her like a nerve agent exposure. She's in rough shape, but she was alive when they moved her. They're not letting anyone near her who doesn't absolutely need to be there, so sit tight." Yet Ronald shook his head and said, "If she wakes up she might be the only one who can tell us who gave her those bags." And Harris paused, knowing that was true. A few calls later, Ronald found himself in a sanitized room off the emergency unit, wearing a disposable gown and mask while Zeus stayed with another handler outside. And through a transparent curtain he saw Suzanne on a hospital bed, tiny under the white sheets, wires taped to her chest and arms, a clear mask over her nose and mouth, her blonde hair fanned around her head like she'd spent an hour tossing and turning. A doctor adjusted a drip and then turned to Ronald, saying, "She's lucky you intervened when you did. Whatever she was exposed to acts fast, shuts down breathing, messes with the heart, but we got antidotes in quickly. Right now she's stable but weak. If you want to talk to her, keep it short, she's still drifting." And Ronald nodded, stepping closer to the bed, his badge feeling heavy at his chest. He gently said, "Suzanne?" And her eyelids fluttered, then lifted a fraction, hazy eyes focusing slowly on his face, and for a second he thought she might panic, remembering the noise and chaos, yet instead her fingers twitched against the sheet like she was trying to grab something. "Doggy?" she whispered, voice muffled by the mask. "He's okay." Ronald answered softly, "He's outside. He's the one who knew those bags were bad. He wanted you away from them," and she frowned, trying to process that. "Uncle said they were presents," she murmured, and Ronald leaned a little closer, careful not to disturb any lines. "Can you tell me about him?" he asked, gentle but firm. "You're not in trouble, you didn't do anything wrong. But we have to find that man before he hurts anyone else." And Suzanne blinked slowly, then said, "He's not my real uncle. Mommy says I don't have uncles, but he told me to call him Uncle Marty. He picked me up after school," said Mommy was at the airport waiting, her words drifting in and out like she was walking through fog, yet every phrase mattered. Ronald encouraged her, asking, "What did he look like?" And Suzanne answered in small pieces, saying, "Gray hoodie, cap, beard but not big, just here," and she tapped her own chin weakly. "He had a line here, like a scratch, and he smelled funny, not like Daddy, like cleaning stuff and something from the garage." Details that would mean everything to the investigators. She coughed once, a dry little sound, then added, "He took a picture of me with the bags before he went away. He said Mommy would see it later." And Ronald's jaw tightened, because that meant there was likely a phone with that picture somewhere in the building, and the man would have been close enough to watch the entire incident. Maybe ready with a device to trigger the explosives if security had tried to inspect the bags instead of just letting the child walk. "You did really well, Suzanne," he told her. "You helped us a lot. I promise we're going to find him." And she nodded, eyes closing again, whispering, "Tell Doggy thank you," before drifting back to sleep. Back in the operations center, Ronald joined Harris and a small knot of federal agents around a bank of monitors where security footage from the terminal played on loop. One agent froze the image at the moment Suzanne appeared near the kiosks, zooming on the upper level behind her where a man in a gray hoodie leaned on a railing, cap pulled low. When they enlarged his face, the image blurred, but you could still see the short dark beard and a faint pale line on the left side of his chin, exactly where Suzanne had indicated, and that confirmation hardened something inside Ronald that had still been struggling with guilt. They followed the man through cameras as he watched the confrontation from above, staying just far enough back to avoid standing out, then turning sharply when Suzanne collapsed and walking away at a quick, controlled pace rather than running, which meant he still believed he might slip out unnoticed. The trail led down a flight of stairs, across the food court, and toward one of the international gate clusters, where he disappeared briefly into a crowd before popping up again near gate M21, choosing a seat with a clear line of sight to the boarding desk. "There," Ronald said, tapping the screen. "He's trying to blend in and wait for his flight out." And Harris, already on the radio, barked instructions for units to converge on that gate while one of the federal agents said, "We don't broadcast what we know yet. If he realizes we've identified him, he might trigger something else, or take a hostage." And that thought made Ronald's hand tighten around Zeus's leash when he stepped back into the hall. Because now it wasn't only about what had been in those bags, it was also about what might still be in that backpack the man carried. Minutes later, Ronald and Zeus were sprinting through service corridors toward the M gates while other officers tried to set up a perimeter from the main side. Zeus ran with purpose, head low, ears angled forward, the memory of the earlier scent still imprinted in his mind. As they emerged near the food court, Zeus tugged slightly left, picking up a track Ronald couldn't see but trusted, weaving around clusters of travelers who stared as the pair cut through the open space. They reached the wide seating area of gate M21 and slowed just enough to scan faces. And there he was, hoodie, cap, black backpack at his feet, phone in his hand, looking up at the boarding screen and then down again, trying to look bored and failing because his foot bounced too fast and his grip on the phone was too tight. Zeus's growl started low in his chest. Not loud enough to draw attention yet, but deep enough that Ronald felt it through the leash. Ronald raised his voice just enough for the nearest people to hear and said, "Sir in the gray hoodie, airport police, keep your hands where I can see them." But the man's head jerked up, and in that instant his eyes met Ronald's and flicked down to Zeus, and he understood he'd been made. Instead of raising his hands, he surged to his feet and spun toward a nearby trash can, hand diving into his hoodie pocket for something small. Most likely the remote bomb squad had suspected. Ronald shouted, "Don't do it," and simultaneously yelled, "Zeus, take him," giving the command that turned the dog from detector to pursuer. Zeus launched, his body a single powerful movement, closing the gap before the man could bring his hand up, slamming into his legs and sending him crashing sideways into the trash can, metal rattling, contents spilling. A small black device flew from the man's hand and skidded across the floor toward a row of chairs, stopping under an armrest. Zeus clamped his jaws around the man's forearm and held on with all the focus he had, ignoring punches and kicks as the man tried to wrench free. Ronald was on them a second later, grabbing the suspect's other arm and twisting it behind his back while shouting for everyone in the area to move back and keep their hands visible. Some people screamed and ran, others froze and filmed, yet this time Ronald barely heard them. He jammed his knee between the man's shoulder blades and forced him flat, cuffing his wrists while Zeus maintained his hold just below the elbow until Ronald gave the release word. When the man was finally restrained, Ronald grabbed the small device with gloved fingers, heart pounding as he saw the single large button on its face, proof that the bomb techs had been right. "You handed a nerve bomb to a 6-year-old, Ronald said, leaning close enough that the man could feel every word. "So you're going to tell us who you're working with and how many more of these toys you have out there." But the suspect just stared ahead, jaw clenched, breathing hard, saying nothing. Federal agents took custody after that, walking the cuffed man down the corridor surrounded by officers while Zeus trotted at Ronald's side, watchful and silent. Over the next 2 days, interrogations and lab work filled every hour, and the story began to leak out in patches through news alerts and social media posts, starting as shaky cell videos of a dog lunging at a little girl and an officer ripping bags from her hands, followed by headlines that twisted the narrative in a dozen directions until official statements began to clarify what had really happened, and even then, half the internet still argued about whether Ronald and Zeus had acted properly. Ronald didn't bother reading most of it, because every spare moment he got he asked for updates on Suzanne instead, waiting for any sign that she was improving. Finally one afternoon a doctor called to say her breathing was steady without the mask and she was awake for longer stretches, and her parents, who had flown in as soon as they were notified, wanted to meet the officer and the dog who had stopped the disaster. When Ronald walked down the long hospital corridor with Zeus at his side, leash loose in his hand, he felt more unsettled than he had rushing toward gate M21, because facing armed suspects was one thing and facing a family whose child had almost died under his watch was another kind of weight. He paused at Suzanne's door, knocked once, and stepped in when her mother called, "Come in." And inside he saw a scene that hit him harder than any briefing. Suzanne propped up on pillows with a light blanket over her legs, color back in her cheeks, a faint force still taped to her arm, her parents close on either side, both looking tired in the way people look when they haven't slept but are too relieved to complain. When Suzanne spotted Zeus, her whole face brightened, and she pointed with her free hand, saying, "Mom, that's him, that's the doggy," excitement mixing with a rasp in her voice. Zeus stopped just short of the bed and looked up at Ronald for permission, then moved closer when Ronald nodded, resting his chin gently on the mattress near her knees. Suzanne's fingers slid into his fur, and she sat there for a moment, just feeling the warmth and steadiness of him. Then she said quietly, "I was mad at you when you yelled and took my bags, but now Mom says those bags were bad and the candles weren't candles, and she says I might not be here without you." And she looked from Zeus to Ronald with serious eyes that were far older than they should have been. Her mother put a hand on her shoulder and said to Ronald, "We saw the footage before anyone explained anything. I was ready to hate you, I'll be honest, but then the investigators told us what was in those bags and what would have happened if they'd gotten on a plane, and we realized you and your dog saved not just our daughter but probably a lot of other people." And her voice broke a little on the last part. Suzanne's father stepped forward, shook Ronald's hand firmly, and said, "I don't know how to repay what you did, but I want you to know we're telling everyone who will listen that this officer and his dog are the reason our child is alive." And Ronald, who had carried the sound of that little body hitting the terminal floor like a stone in his chest, felt something ease for the first time since the incident. Suzanne reached toward Zeus's face and said, "Thank you for yelling at my bags." And the simple way she framed it made Ronald smile despite everything. Her dad produced a small pouch of dog treats the nurse had allowed and handed one to Suzanne, who held it out carefully. Zeus took it with careful teeth, then gave her hand a slow lick, making her giggle, a sound that proved she had a future beyond this day. They talked for a few more minutes, light topics about what kind of tricks Zeus knew and how long he had been a police dog. Then a nurse gently reminded them that Suzanne needed rest. And as Ronald and Zeus backed toward the door, Suzanne called, "Come visit again, okay?" And Ronald answered, "You can count on it," knowing he meant it, out in the corridor as they walked away from the room. Ronald glanced down at Zeus and said, "You did good, partner. You scared everyone half to death and you did good." And Zeus simply wagged his tail once and kept pace, as if none of it was special, it was just the job. Later, when investigations wrapped and reports were filed, when the suspect's network was uncovered and arrests were made in 3 different cities, the official commendations named a long list of agencies and units. But at the center of every account there was always that same moment in the terminal, a child with 2 innocent-looking bags, a crowd quick to judge, and one dog who refused to obey the pressure to stand down because his nose told him that the real danger wasn't the shouting or the cameras but the invisible poison seeping into a little girl's body. Years afterward, whenever Ronald heard that familiar headline repeated, "K9 barks desperately at a crying little girl." But when police realized the truth, it was too late. On some recap show or training presentation, he would think of Suzanne laughing as Zeus accepted a treat from her hand, alive and healing, and he would feel that deep, quiet satisfaction that came from knowing that, on the day when it counted most, he had trusted his partner over the crowd, and because of that a child had gone home instead of becoming a name in a memorial, and the dog beside him had proven, beyond any argument, that sometimes the loudest, most desperate warning is exactly what saves a life. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of this story. If you enjoyed this story, I promise you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more thrilling as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.